Welcome to the second video of Introduction to Brush Lettering with Lovely Loops. In this video, we'll be going over the lowercase alphabet. Now, I would encourage you to look at the previous video that we posted that goes over brush lettering basics. So we talk about the brush pen, how to make thick and thin strokes, and we went over the 7 basic strokes. The 7 basic strokes will be the foundation for all of your lowercase letters. So we have broken each letter down into the basic strokes. Most of them are comprised of 3 or 4 basic strokes. We show how to combine them to create the letter with each stroke in a different color. And then we have spots for you to trace and practice the letters by themselves, and eventually we'll do letters connected together. So I would watch, if I were you, the introduction video so you can learn how to do each of these basic strokes, because I won't be going into them in depth during this video. The purpose of this video is for you to be able to see someone else write. So it's pretty straightforward how we have this laid out. You can follow along and do it yourself, but I find it helps to actually watch someone else do it if I'm having trouble. So watch the first video and we're going to jump right in with the letter A. So the letter A is an entrance stroke, oval, and underturn. And again, we have each stroke in a different color. That also means between each stroke, if you remember from our last video, you'll want to lift your pen between the strokes. So it's not like cursive where your pen never leaves the paper. You'll be lifting between every stroke, okay? So I'll leave the color-coded ones. I won't draw on them so you can see them, but starts with an entrance, lift, then an oval, then an underturn. Okay, turn this a little bit. I'll do each one twice. So entrance, oval, underturn. You'll notice that we're going pretty slowly. This, again, it's not a race, it's not cursive where you can just scribble everything really quick. You want to make sure you're doing everything precisely and consistently. Okay, let's go to B. It's an entrance stroke, an ascending stem loop, and I have a note here that it's a partial ascending stem loop. If you were to look at the actual ascending stem loop, it goes all the way down to the baseline, I'm sorry, the descender line. Since the B curves, no, that is the baseline. Since it curves on the bottom, it won't be a true ascending stem loop that is flat at the bottom. It'll be curved. And so it'll be like this throughout, where we have slight variations on the basic strokes, but for the most part, you should be able to understand what we're doing, okay? So it's an entrance, a partial ascending stem loop that turns into an underturn, and then we have a mini underturn. So let's demonstrate. Entrance, lift, ascending stem loop that turns into an underturn, lift, and then a mini underturn. Now, if you were to write this in cursive, you probably would just connect the loop with your lead-in stroke. We do not do that in brush lettering. We lift between, because the angle here versus here is different, and you need that difference. Okay, so I did the entrance stroke, ascending loop, underturn, mini underturn. Okay, now let's go to C. Starts as usual with an entrance stroke. Now there's a partial oval, so rather than going all the way around, you'll stop at the bottom, do another entrance stroke, which, like we mentioned on the previous page, is also called an exit stroke. So here's an example where it's an entrance and an exit. That matches that. And then you can add a dot here if you want. You don't have to. I usually do, to make it look a little more clean. Okay. Next is a D. So we start with our entrance stroke. We do our oval, lift. This is an extended underturn, so instead of starting here and doing an underturn, you'll start up high. The D typically is shorter than twice the height, so rather than starting up here, I usually start 3/4 of the way up. Entrance, remember we're doing thin up, thick down, thin up, thick down, thin up. Okay, E, you can do it two ways. So the way I have it in the diagram is basically how you would probably write an E anyway, starting right here and going thin up, then it turns into a partial oval, or this section is really the same as your C, ends in an exit stroke. Or you could do an entrance, start at the top like this, do your exit stroke, and then go back in and add this. I know people who like to do that. I personally do it like this, where I start right here and go up and around. Okay, next is F, so it's an entrance stroke, ascending stem loop, and if you remember in the other video, I talked about a couple strokes having, or a couple letters having some strokes that are only in those letters, so I call this the F in quotes, but basically it's a loop under here. So you'll start with your entrance, then your ascending stem loop going down, curves into that loop. We go back up. Since we're going up, it's a thin stroke, and then you exit out this way. So I have a note here, you can start your F since it's since it goes both above and below your X height, unlike most letters that only either are the X height or go either above or below. This one does both, so I like to make it a little bit shorter so it doesn't look too tall, meaning I start my F rather than starting it up here like a true ascending stem loop. I start it a little bit further down right here. Oops, I forgot my entrance stroke. So entrance, ascending loop, comes down thick and goes back up thin and exits out that way. Okay, so we've done A through F using our basic strokes with some variations on those basic strokes. Now let's do G through L. So G is an entrance stroke with an oval, a true descending stem loop, and then an entrance or exit stroke. Descending stem loop, comes up thin, and we'll talk later on in another video about some cool variations you can do with your G and make the loop interesting, but for now let's just stick with the basics. Okay, next is H. Bet you can guess it starts with an entrance stroke, ascending stem loop, and then our very first letter that has a compound curve in it, like that. Entrance. And I'm not copying these exactly. You'll see sometimes it's kind of hard to trace, but this should give you a good idea of where you want your strokes to be. Okay, I is probably as simple as it can get. All it is an entrance stroke, an underturn, and a dot. And the second half of your underturn matches exactly with your entrance stroke. They should be parallel, and they should be the same, they should both be thin and the same. If you were to take out this part of your underturn, they match. J starts with an entrance stroke, descending stem loop, then an exit, and a dot. All right. K is one of those letters that has a stroke that's exclusive to that letter. So this, I just call it a K. Didn't know what else to call it. So we'll do an entrance, ascending stem loop. Now, when you come across a stroke that is brand new, you just need to remember what we've talked about. Thin up, thick down, thin up, thick down. So since we're starting and going up, it's thin. As soon as we start coming back down, it's thick, and then it just ends with an exit. These ascending letters are also really fun to add variations to. We'll talk about that in a few videos. All right, an L is pretty straightforward. It's the exact same as the B that we went over, except you don't include this mini underturn. So it's just an entrance, an ascending stem loop that curves at the bottom into a partial underturn. And like I said before, second half of your underturn is the same as an exit stroke. Wow, we've already done 2 pages. Let's go on to M through R. So M is 2 overturns and then a compound curve. And I mentioned before, this is the first letter where your entrance is not the same as an entrance stroke because you're coming at it from the bottom. So it starts, like I said, as an overturn, lift, do another overturn, lift, do a compound curve. N is the exact same minus the first overturn. So it's just 1 overturn with a compound curve. Okay. O, we start off with an entrance stroke. Then we do our oval. Then you can do the same mini underturn that you used in the B. Basically, it's just thick down, thin up. You may notice when I'm doing my entrance strokes that connect to an oval, like I have in my G and my O and A. The entrance stroke, you can bring it all the way to the top of your X height, or you can take it just partially, almost all the way up to right about here, so that when you make your oval, it connects smoothly with it, rather than, I'll show you what it looks like. If you were to continue up, sometimes it might look like that, where your O or your oval doesn't exactly connect. Like you can even see in my pink example right here, it can be a little more smooth if you just make your entrance stroke go 80% of the way. Okay, let's do P. So P is another one that has a little bit of a weird stroke, but it starts off with an entrance. Then all we're doing now is just a thick downstroke. This was the very first stroke we learned back in the beginning when we were learning the difference between thick and thins. So it's just a full pressure downstroke. Remember again that we're going on an angle here. We're not doing things straight up and down perpendicular to this line. We're doing an angle. So these lines are angled. Okay, so we started off with our entrance stroke. We do a full pressure downstroke that has a bit of an angle, and then I'm calling this a modified overturn. So an overturn is like the first stroke of your M, but instead of going down to the baseline all the way, you'll bring it in a little bit like this, like that, and then leave with an exit / entrance stroke. Okay, so entrance, full pressure, downstroke, and then a modified overturn with an exit. Next is Q, and actually, you know the F stroke I talked about earlier? This one also shows up in the Q, but you'll start off with your entrance. Since we're connecting to an oval, you could go partially up instead of all the way up. We do our oval, Another reason that you might want to start your oval at 2 o'clock, which I mentioned when we were going over the basic strokes, is that if you don't match up exactly with the thin line, then you can kind of cover it up with your, if you're making this an A or a D or a G, it covers up where that line would have connected. So this is the same F stroke that we did for our lowercase f right here. So this bottom pink part is the same as the bottom pink part of the Q. So entrance, partially up, oval, and then the bottom of an F with an exit. Okay, next is R. So R starts with an entrance stroke. This is another weird one where we have a stroke that doesn't show up in any other letter. I'm calling it a small downstroke, but basically you just do full pressure down and then kind of lift up as you go towards the side. So like that, you'll start with full pressure and lift up as you go sideways. And then we'll do a partial underturn. So rather than starting your underturn as you normally would at the top of your X height, start a little bit farther down right where you ended up with that small downstroke. Okay. So one thing to note is that this small downstroke does start above the X height. It would look weird if your R would look really short if you made your R the same height as an X. Okay, and actually I forgot to mention that up here, same with your P. This thick downstroke starts above your X height. So let's do another R. Entrance stroke, start above your X height and do a small downstroke that gradually gets a little bit thinner, and then a partial underturn. Now, one thing I see a lot with R's that people do that doesn't look right, you can do it, but it won't look the same as this, is making this downstroke come back up. You never want the bottom to be higher than any part of it. Someone once explained to me it's like when water falls down, it won't ever come back up. It just down, 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 down. Okay? So rather than looking like that, where I have this part coming back up, I prefer it to look like that. And that's probably how you've seen it before, is this way. All right, let's go on to our second last page of letters, S. There's a lot of different ways you can do S, which we'll talk about in our variations page, but here's a simple way to do it. Start with an entrance stroke and then just draw an S how you normally would, except in brush lettering you'll make it thick coming down. It's pretty simple. Just draw an S. We'll talk more about that one later. Okay, a T is an entrance stroke, an extended underturn, and again, similar to the D, the T is typically a little bit shorter than 2 times your X height. So rather than starting all the way up here, you want to start a little bit lower, but it's an underturn with a crossbar. You can do some fun variations with the crossbar, which we will talk about later on. Okay, a U is a compound curve plus an underturn. It's the opposite of an N, or upside down of an N. A V is almost the same. It starts off with a compound curve. Instead of doing a full underturn, you just do that same mini underturn that we did with the B. Compound curve, mini underturn. Okay, next is a W, and a W is a U plus that mini underturn. So compound curve, underturn. If we were to stop right there, it would be a U, but we're going to add the underturn from the V. X is a little bit of a weird one because you're doing a compound curve, but I'm going to break a rule here, even though I said you always, always, always do downstrokes being thick. I'm gonna tell you that that rule is broken here because your compound curve is down thin and then you cross it thick like that. So if you were doing a real compound curve that looks like this, then that would just be way too thick. So this is the way I like to do it, is do a thin compound curve and then cross it thick. You could certainly do a regular compound curve and cross it upwards thin. This just looks a little nicer sometimes. So whatever way you want to do it, just make one of the strokes thick and one of them thin. Alrighty, last page, 2 letters left and then we'll do numbers. Y is a compound curve with a descending stem loop. Compound curve, lift, descending stem loop, lift, and then an exit. A lot of words end in Y, so it's a really fun one to add some cool flourishes to. A Z is an overturn with, I just call it a loop here. So you're going down so it's thick and you just do a little loop. Lift and then do an exit. Overturn, loop, thick down, thin up, and then exit. All right, we're done with the alphabet. Let's do numbers quick and then we'll do the alphabet all connected together. So numbers, you can do whatever your style of writing numbers is, just apply the principles of brush lettering, being thick down, thin up, and angled slightly. So like this 1 is not a straight up and down 1. We have an angle here, okay? So I'll just draw out how I do it. Thin up, thick down for 1. You could add a baseline like that to it. 2 is thin up, thick down. That's kind of like an overturn. You could do like a loop like that. Make it a little more loopy. 3, thick down. Also, whenever you're going sideways, like when we cross the T, it'll be a thin stroke. So I guess thick down, thin up, and sideways. You don't have to do a flat 3, you could do it like this. 4, since it has 2 strokes, I usually do this one first, and that one. You could make these connect, like a triangle. 5 is pretty simple. Just your flat will be thin, down is thick. 6, you can do, I would recommend doing it 1 stroke down like this, and then start back up here and do another stroke down. If you were to just do a 6, like how you would probably normally write it, since I'm coming up right here, it's thin here. I like to see it thick, so that's why I do it in 2 separate strokes, 2 down strokes like that. Okay, and then 7, we cross up and sideways are thin, down is thick. 8, I start up here on the top right, come down thick, up thin. You could do 2 ovals like that. 9 is similar to the 6, where I go down here like that, lift, and then do a second stroke like that, so that both sides are thick. If you normally write 9s like that, then that's how you would do it. I write 9s like this. So that's why I do them in 2 separate strokes, because otherwise that part is thin and I'd rather it be thick. Okay, congratulations! You made it through lowercase alphabet and numbers. So next we will go over the connected alphabet. So we learned all of the letters of the lowercase alphabet using our basic strokes, which I've put up here for you to reference. Now we want to practice connecting the letters. So the entrance stroke and exit stroke, which, just to remind you, here's an example of what they look like. I have them called entrance/exit, not only because they are exactly the same, but because one letter's exit stroke becomes the next letter's entrance stroke. So, for example, the exit of this A becomes the entrance of the B. Even though the A ends in an underturn, the second half of that underturn is an exit stroke. So I'm going to go over this alphabet and just practice connecting the letters for you to watch. Remember your basic strokes up here, and remember to lift your pen between the basic strokes. So this will serve as an example of watching someone else do it. Remember, for your entrance strokes that connect to an oval, I usually only go up partially, and I start my ovals over here because my stem is going to end up covering it up if I don't match the start and finish of it exactly. Okay, so now my underturn becomes the entrance stroke of my B. Remember to lift between here. Don't just connect your entrance stroke to this loop because you'll be coming at the wrong angle. Mini underturn becomes an entrance for the C. So if I had just the C by itself, the entrance stroke would come from down here like it does for the A, but we just want to connect the letters in a smooth way. So C, I do this, then I add the dot afterwards. Dot is optional. The oval of the D, the extended underturn coming up to be the entrance stroke of the E. Remember I told you the ascending stem loop of the F can start lower than it does for the B because the F is 2 units or 3 units tall. Okay. Just always lift between your strokes. Exit of the G becomes the entrance of the H. Compound curve becomes the entrance of the I. You can always save your dots for the end if that's how you do it. I usually like to dot my letters so that I don't forget, and it helps that I lift my pen between all the strokes because then I don't have to come back to it. I can just do it right then. So you get the point. Lift between each stroke, connect the letters by making one exit the entrance for the next stroke. Sometimes you have to modify it based on, like here, your L would normally be an exit stroke that just comes straight up, but since your next letter is an M and it's a compound or an overturn as the entrance stroke, this curves over into that overturn. Same thing here. Between the M and the N, you curve. That part of the O is similar to the B over here, where you just want to connect the letters, even though normally you'd start the P with an entrance, a regular entrance stroke. Remember, the P full pressure starts above your X height. Modified overturn. I actually have a variation in here versus what I showed you before, but we'll talk about variations on the next page. Oval, F stroke comes up. Don't forget that your R starts above your X height, comes down, and then a partial underturn. S is pretty simple. T is an extended underturn with a crossbar. Since U is next, we don't do our typical exit stroke. It's an overturn, compound curve into an underturn. These letters in a row have a lot of squiggling up and down. See here, remember, the compound curve is thin going down, breaking all the rules. Cross it thick this way. That's the only place ever that I give you permission to do a downstroke that's thin. Descending stem loop up, modified overturn into a loop, finish it off. All right, so now we know the basic strokes and we know the alphabet. Practice, practice, practice the alphabet. Practice your basic strokes, practice the thicks and the thins, and then we can talk about refining your style with variations on the basic strokes. And that will be our next video.